Because mawadda means mutual love. The Prophet said to us, I only have كُلَّ أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا مَوَدَّةً فِي الْقُرْبَى. I don't ask you for anything except that you love my family. The love of Ahlul-bayt is the most important thing for the followers of the Prophet to follow after the Quran. So this mawadda doesn't mean that we love the Ahlul-bayt, they don't love us back. No, they love us back. It's a mutual love. So mawadda is to give your life to your spouse, to sacrifice. The world of problems today, why a marriage fails is everybody's selfish. Humanity has become so selfish that they say, you know what, I make my money, you make your money, you go your way, I go my way, or I'll cook for myself, or I won't feed my children. I mean, I don't know what happened to marriages today. And we're going to talk about what some of the problems are in society that's causing this extreme liberty, freedom, extremes. At the same time, what's the opposite, the repression that's been in the world. Some of us are from families that were, say, Christian or other faiths. It's important you guys explain to us what happened. Because the church, for example, was repressive in terms of sexuality. They didn't allow their priests or their nuns to get married, for example, the Catholic Church. I will mention that. But something very interesting. Anybody studied psychology? You did? Have you heard of a guy named Harry Harlow? What did he say?
Oh, I graduated.
How long? Was that last year? No.
2 years.
Long time ago, for me, it's 20 years ago. Okay. But anyway, in psychology, there's something called the Harlow experiment. And he did a study called the chemical basis for love. And what was fascinating in his conclusion, because remember I talked about mawadda, the love, the affection, how important it is, and Allah has created that for us, that we love each other. In this experiment, his conclusion was that affection is the basic need that lets us function optimally. Without it, we do not feel whole. Affection releases certain chemicals in the brain that gives us the feeling of happiness. So what are we feeling that we're lacking in life, especially those who are not married yet? They want to have someone to be one with, to have that affection and love with, and they're striving to find that perfect match, or the right match, meaning when I say perfect, it doesn't mean that they have to be ideal. So for example, I'll give you my example. I've been married 23 years, alhamdulillah, this year. And before we got married, we were writing each other. No emails in those days, but we were writing letters to each other across country. And I wanted some specific things in a wife, and she probably wanted some specific in a husband. And for a few years, I don't think this is the right person. She's lacking this thing. I wanted perfection. I wanted this, say the Fatima type example, right? And anyway, it just came out that I said to myself, am I stupid? I'm foolish. I found the right person. I'm writing to the right person. Allah's guiding me to meet the right person. And I'm looking and I can't find anything better. And I've told you this story before. I said, okay, we met first time. I mean, we were writing whenever we met. So for years we were writing, like almost like pen pals in those days. And when we finally met, the next day I met her father and we proposed. So the first day I met her, the next day we proposed. It was like, this is like old-fashioned stuff. Anyway, you always have these questions. And I've said this story to you before. I said, what was the question? I said, did I make the right decision? Is there someone better for me out there? When I knew I was right, that I picked the right person, was before she got married with myself. Her father and her mother took her to the 14 Masumin Ziyarah. And she came back with an empty luggage case. Now, not to put women down, but whenever they go to these countries, what do? Shop. They go crazy for the hijabs and the scarves and all these little trinkets. She came back with nothing. I said, okay, that's nice. And I said, what happened? She said, we went to Iraq and I saw so much poverty that I could not bear seeing it. And I had to give everything away. And that night I went home, I said, alhamdulillah, I found the right person. Because that's the person I've been looking for. The one who's willing to sacrifice everything of the material world for Allah. Alhamdulillah, we got married. The doctor said we'll never have kids, we have 4. So Allah has a plan. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali.
Everybody
Muhammad.
has that match out there. Inshallah, all of us, Allah has that for us. So, what is going wrong in the world? Maybe because the marriages are without the affection, without that trust, without the sacrifice. If you look at Europe today, it's supposed to be a continent that's considered of great justice. They think that all this justice, but there's so much divorce. People don't even want to get married anymore, and then it's so expensive they can't even afford to get married anymore. And as we talked before, the youths in nations like Switzerland and the Scandinavian countries, everybody's committing suicide, mass suicide amongst the youth. One of the problems is that even within siblings, with the parents and their children, even within the husband and wife, there's very little love and affection displayed. It's like a cold shoulder. Yeah, here's your allowance, here's your Lamborghini, here's your food. Bye, we're going on vacation for the next 2 months. I'm serious. I remember one of my sons, he was in kindergarten, his mother comes to us and says, "Can you watch my son for the weekend?" I said, "He's 5 years old. You don't know us. You've never met us in your life." She said, "No problem." I said, you know, we do a lot of things. We pray." He said, "No, it's good. Let him pray with you." It's okay. He woke up for Fajr with us after the morning prayer. 5-year-old guy named Harry. Beautiful kid. Yes? He's 8? Okay. What is he doing in kindergarten? Yes? Okay, grade 1. Thanks. Anyway, so what does that mean? The parents abandon the child and they have their life to live. Following month, the same thing happened again. He said, "Can you watch Harry again?" I said, "Where are you going? What about your child?" And it's a sad situation. These children are raised without their parents. And if you ever saw that study, they showed a study of children when they were born, they kept them separate from their moms, and the moms were not giving them love and affection. They began to get sick, and some of them actually were, on the verge of death. So the affection is so important. It's something Allah's given us to become near to Him. It's something beautiful. So for Muslims, the institution of marriage is based on a mutual and natural interest. It's cordial between spouses. It represents the manifestation of the divine will. Now, a lot of the sources of this information I'm giving is from Mutahhari's book on sexual ethics, Syed Rizvi's book on marriage and morals. Ayatullah Ibrahim Amini has done a book on also family. So we have a lot of sources of knowledge, and the information is in the Quran, and the information is in the Hadith. And it's a tough world out there. And one of the things is marriage is beautiful because it's a blessing that it helps you eliminate the dangers of society. What happens? Last week we had a discussion with the young brothers, under 17, 11 to 17, about what happens to them in puberty. And it starts before puberty and it happens after. They have these desires and they don't know what to do. And this magnetic force that's pushing them towards doing things. And if you know Imam Jaffer Sadiq's hadith,
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali
he said
Muhammad.
about Surah Yusuf, he said, "Don't teach it to your daughters when they're young, but teach it to your sons, because it will affect their minds." If you know Surah Yusuf, Prophet Yusuf, as for the brothers, he was able to avoid doing haram with the woman who was chasing him, Zulayka. And for the women, if a young girl hears that, maybe she'll want to chase as well. So this is a Quranic surah. Can you imagine TV today? If you turn on any channel on the news, music, there was a little girl, I don't know, 6 years old, and she was watching Justin Bieber's song, and she was crying. She says, "Justin Bieber loves me." What does the music do? It makes, especially young girls, it makes them feel that the singer loves them. And they're singing like this song, "Baby," to them. I don't know what's going on, but they're manipulating the minds, these precious young minds, and they're telling them what to do. And there's another song, a girl is singing that says, "I kissed a girl and I liked it." I mean, this is the society we're living in today. How are you going to be protected? What are you going to do? Now, we're talking very candidly, but what are we going to do? One of the greatest things Allah has given us is eventually finding the mate, marriage. It will help you demagnetize these problems that are in society. These struggles that nafs amara bisu, that are pushing you, the desires that are pushing you. You say, no, I don't need to go that direction. And it's one of the things that saves you from going the wrong direction. In Surah Yusuf, chapter 12, verse 53, one of the beautiful ayats in that surah is Bismillahir. وَمَا أُبِرُوا نَفْسِي إِنَّ نَفْسِ الْأَمَارَ بِالسُّوءِ إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي إِنَّ رَبِّي غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. Allah says that, and I do not declare myself free. This is Prophet Yusuf talking. Most surely man's self is wanting to do something not right. The nafs amara bisu. It's sometimes being pushed, our desires are pushing you to something that's not right. And how are you going to be saved? The ayat says it's only because of the mercy of Allah that you can be saved. We had a discussion with the Afghan masjid last year in Ramadan. And we were talking to one brother and he was saying, you know what, I can handle anything. I said, so what happens you're at work and your colleague says, come home to my house, your boss, and she's a woman, you're a man, can you handle it? Yeah, no problem. So what happens if she asks you to do something that you don't want to do? No, I don't have to do anything, I'm strong. I said, this is Prophet Yusuf in Quran telling you, wait a second, I can't handle this situation, Allah. Get me out of here. I'd rather be in jail than to be in this house of Zuleika. And you're saying we can handle it? It's tough. We're human beings. We have desires. Allah's given us as a gift. But if the society is pushing us in a direction, how are we going to be strong? One of the strengths, of course, is to get married one day, inshallah, with the right spouse. Now, one of the important things is some people practice something called zuhud, which means detachment. It doesn't mean abandonment of marriage. It just means that you are going the right direction, not going toward the wrong things. You don't abandon the material world, you use it in the right way. So only when human beings understand the material needs of this world are the means to get to Allah. And it's not the goal. What happens to us, some of us who go to university, we say, well, I want to date someone today, someone else tomorrow, 7 days a week, 7 different women. It's York University, they ever say it's the University of Women, okay, 50 girls in a week, you know. What has happened? It's been pushed by the medium. And the ego of human beings is, yeah, look, see, I got that girl. The girl says, well, I got that girl too. What happened? Or I got that guy. It's a tough environment that we live in. So, let's talk about sexual ethics. This is what Mutahhari is explaining. Sexual morals, sexual ethics, all these are different norms that are talked about. Personal habits, behavior patterns. Some aspects of sexual ethics are, for example, female and male modesty, honor of members of the household, protecting the honor, chastity, faithfulness of the spouse, covering the private part. These are all different aspects of sexual ethics. Even when, for example, a husband is very protective, almost like jealous of the wife, and the wife the same for her husband. Why do we have these psychological behavior patterns? Isn't jealousy considered something bad? There's all these questions in sexual ethics. The one we're going to answer today is the one that a lot of the youth go through a lot. It's about sexual morals in the modern world. And people are saying, forget the concept of marriage. Why do we need that? Why do I have to go through that stress and burden and end up in divorce? Because 7 out of 10 are getting divorced anyway, and those are the only ones who are getting married. Most people are in a tough environment. They become selfish, and they fight, and they argue. It's okay, bye. I mean, it's coming in our communities. It's everywhere. I know people, a few young brothers and sisters in this community, the last couple of years are married, within a year they're divorced. And they're good Muslims. It's not like they're bad people, they're good. What's going on? Well, let's talk about a little bit of history. What has happened in history? First, has anyone was a Christian before in faith? Okay, so I'll throw something out at you. Paul has a few verses in the Bible that talks about, you know, for example, Corinthians 1:7-1. I don't know if you read some of the Bible.
Okay.
This one thing he says, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. So what happened? There was this concept of dualism. He says, well, one is good and one is bad, so avoid touching the women. And then he says in Corinthians 1:7-25-28, this is the interesting verse of the Bible. He says, now concerning the unmarried, he's talking about some of you guys who are not married, I think that in the view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. Meaning, don't get married. As you are free from a wife, then do not seek a wife. He said, don't even bother to find a wife. This is Paul, St. Paul, who was actually not an apostle of Jesus, but he came many years after and wrote a large portion of the Bible. Then he says, but if you marry, you don't sin. And a girl marries, and she doesn't sin. Yet, those who marry shall have trouble in the flesh. So right there, it's pushing that celibacy in the Catholic Church is important, based on these few verses of the Bible. I mean, there are some other talks about sexuality in the Bible, like there's one that says in Matthew, if you look at a woman lustfully, it's like doing adultery. So they have this negative connotations, and Paul is explaining, repression of the sexual desires. St. Augustine the same, who actually was very sexually active, but then he said, you know what, this is evil. And that's when the concept of dualism came in the church. And so there was this negative view of marriage. There's a negative view of sexuality. And so everybody felt guilty. And then if you look even in the 60s, there's the Pope came out with Vatican II, and it was, the 60s was a boom for sexuality, especially in the West. And they said, birth control, forget it, it's forbidden. I'm talking about the artificial birth control. They had some other rhythm method that doesn't work, but they said that you can practice, but don't take contraceptives. So people began to rebel. They said priests can't get married. And I remember when I was in my university, my undergraduate was a Catholic university. As one of my priest teachers, he said 2% of nuns and priests are celibate. The rest are not. They can't practice this, but they have to just stay quiet. And now you've seen the problems of the Catholic Church. And when you suppress and oppress the human instincts, they just do something unnatural, unright, unfortunately. Syed Muhammad Rizvi's father wrote a beautiful book on marriage as well, and he wrote something very interesting. He said, if a religion shuts its eyes to the intricacies of family problems, its followers sooner or later will revolt against it, destroying all religious tenets in the wake of rebellion. Actually, since the 1960s, at least 125,000 Catholic priests left being priests because of the celibacy. They got married and they had children. Nuns the same. Syed Rizvi says, Christianity ignored the claims of human nature, extolling the idea of celibacy. Many zealous people tried to live up to the ideal. Monks and nuns shut themselves in monasteries. For a short period of time, this scheme worked. It worked for a very short period of time. Then nature took its revenge, and the monks and the abbots cultivated the idea that they were the representatives of Christ. And the nuns were given the titles of the brides of Christ. And so with an easy conscience, they turned themselves monasteries into a very sexual, liberal environment, hidden, and you began to see these stories uncover. Like, for example, the church that was teared down in Spain, and they found all these little baby bodies buried under the church. I mean, the problems of the world began to come out because of the repression. Then, if you studied psychology and history, Freud was the exact opposite, extreme. And his followers subscribed to a totally different sexual morality. They sought to dispense with traditional sexual morality and replace it with something new. They said, forget this old repression and the Catholic environment, the Christian, forget about it. In the opinion of Freud and his followers, morals were based on limitations and prohibitions concerning human sexuality. So, they claimed that the limitations and prohibitions caused many human afflictions and gave rise to the emotional disturbances, including subconscious fears and obsessions. And then what happened? Then they became the exact opposite, liberal, extreme, that have as many mates as you can find, and don't even know the name, doesn't matter. And then you see the ayat of the Quran, أَفَرَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen him who takes his low desires as God? Now, people love money. People are driven by their libido, their sexual desire. And this is the environment our youth are living in. Every channel they watch, there is no more morality. I mean, anything and everything goes. How do you survive in this world? So this new morality emerged in the West, leaped to an extreme that you saw exploding in the 60s, as I said. From the suppression of natural desires, some preachers went to a total new morality, and now this total sexual freedom. They can do anything and everything. And the whole concept of family and the fabric of human society was being destroyed. Now the church made a serious error, and suppressing the most natural urge that Allah has given humanity. He's given us this to make the species of human to perpetuate. How could you suppress it? What was the reasoning? There's many reasons. You may know as a previous Christian, maybe it's about, well, when the priests are celibate and they die, who inherits? They have no children, so the Catholic Church inherits. It could be driven by capitalism. Unfortunately, a lot of these things are. Also, the sexuality is also driven by capitalism. Why? Because they sell as many contraceptives as they can, and there's a big money-making business. So yes, this is a big issue in the world that we're living in, this material world. Even Bertrand Russell, who was this British philosopher and very, very interesting thinker, he said, if we are to allow this new morality of unrestrained sex to take its course, it is bound to go further than it has ever done and raise difficulties hardly as we can even imagine. So you may say, well, what's happened to the world from multiple partners to almost the extreme of bestiality? And you see that. You go south of the border and you see it openly, there's shows about that. It's shocking. Can you imagine? Unfortunately, the world is not learning from their mistakes. On the other hand, the attempt in the modern world to enforce restrictions which were possible in the former Christian age, which led to impossible stringent of regulation against which human nature would soon rebel. And he continued, Bertrand Russell continued, he said, so it's clear that whatever the dangers or difficulties, we must be content to let the world go forward rather than back. For this purpose, we shall need a genuine new morality. When you read that, what is that genuine new morality? That's where Islam comes in. He finishes by saying, I mean by this the obligations and duties we still have to be recognized, though they were very different from the obligations and duties that were recognized in the past. I do not think that the new system, any more than the old, should involve a yielding, unbridled yielding to impulse. But I think that occasions for restraining impulse and motives for doing so will have to be different from what they have done in the past. This is from his book of Marriage and Morals, page 91 and 92. So he's saying we need something else. This is where the beauty of Islam comes in. Islam does not believe in suppressing one's desires. We don't believe in being aesthetic, like a monk, and live in a mountain. I know some writers, and we'll talk about it in a few seconds, but there's some people who say things that are not correct. Islam does, look what the Quran says. If you read chapter 2, verse 222, it says to have a relationship with your spouse. It doesn't say to suppress your desires. So the Islamic sexual morality is also based on something very different than the way the Catholic Church appreciated it. And it actually encourages satisfying the sexual urges. It's a blessing. It's even worship. Can you imagine that? What religion in the world says that? It's considered a very conservative religion. The Prophet and Imams of Ahlul-bayt also encourage their followers to marry and fulfill their sexual urges in a lawful means. Well, my oldest son was telling me, I don't understand this difference between Islam and Christianity. Doesn't Christianity say that premarital sex is haram? Yeah, Islam says the same thing. But we have a much easier way of getting married. You don't need this whole facade. You can, as you know, there are different forms of marriage. So it's not so hard for a youth today to speak to their parents and say, look, I'm going to university and it's hard. Help me financially and I want to be married. This way I don't have to go through those terrible distractions. And that's the beauty of Islam. We have that ability. Islam holds a person responsible for their bodies, and we have to be careful. Imam Zain al-Abidin in his book,
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
He explained that the body has rights, every body part. He says your sexual organs have rights. You have to be careful. And you've been given this as a trust from Allah. You have to respect the human body. The Quran says the believers are those who protect their sexual organs except with their spouses. This is chapter 23, verse 5 and 6. Therefore, whoever seeks more beyond that in sexual gratification, they are the transgressors. So don't be an extremist. There's a halal way of doing everything. Now, in Islam, non-marital sex is a sin. And you have to take responsibility. When someone's not married, there's no responsibility. And it's forbidden, it's problematic to society, and it's punishable. It's not right. Now, you want to know something amazing? The West has found that out. So what do? They say, well, maybe you didn't get married in a church, in a mosque, in a synagogue, in a Hindu temple, but you're living with that woman, you're married. What do you call it? Common law marriage. Why? Because the rights of the opposite genders were not being given. So now you live with a person, I think more than 30 days, okay, you're common law married. You may have not said the words, so even the West is saying you have to be married. What a beauty behind that. Islam is telling you, do it the right way. The other thing is, you want to see the problems of not getting married? Just watch these shows, like the Maury show. A disaster, right? Anyway, we can go more into that, but here in Canada, you can see there's problems. You can see that in the US, you can see that in Canada. You can see that in Europe, you can see all over the world. There is problems when you don't get married. So the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet and Ahlul-bayt, their view of sexuality and marriage is complete harmony with human nature and can be considered as active worship. There are many writers who attacked women in Islam. This is women's sexuality. And they base their thesis on like these books called 1001 Nights. They think that's Islamic. That's not Islamic. That's paganistic concept. It's not Islam. Then they go to these guys like Al-Ghazali. And so Al-Ghazali is a philosopher, a person who explains things in his way, as from the mystic point of view, the Sufi point of view. That's still not the Quran and the Sunnah. You have to follow the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet through the Ahlul-bayt. So there are some people who read his book and started saying, you know, Islam says bad things about women and you disrespect women. It's not true. Look what the Ahlul-bayt, Imam Jaffer said, lovely, hope, women is amongst the traditions of the Prophet. They love their wives. Again, the Imam also quotes the Prophet. He says, the statement of a husband to his wife that I love you. How do you say that in Arabic? Inni uhibbuki? Okay, you're good at that, right? Yeah. Anyway, will not leave the heart of the spouse. They will love each other. This shows that Islam encourages love. Al-Ghazali and the other mystics, they made a serious mistake in understanding the concept of preparing for the hereafter. The mystics and the Sufis have adopted to forsake the world and for the hereafter. That's not the truth. The truth is you use this world to get closer to God and succeed in this world and the hereafter. If you read the Quran, it's all in the Quran. You don't have to go outside these books. It's there. Chapter 28, verse 77, look what Allah says. Seek amongst that which God has given you, the hereafter, but do not forget your portion in this world either. It says you have to be moderate, not an extremist, and worshiping Allah and using this world is worship. Practicing and living this life, working, having a job, feeding your children is worship. So going back to the concept of love, then we'll open up for discussion. One of the most important aspects of sexual ethics concerns the emotion of love, of its all-embracing and sublime nature. There is no bliss in this world greater than the bond that God has given us in marriage, and tranquility and love and compassion Allah has given us, as the Surah chapter 30, verse 21 explains. So may Allah make all your dreams come true. Inshallah, you find the right spouse. You're blessed with a beautiful family and marriage, as the way the Prophet and his Ahlul-bayt had. Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali
Now the tough part
Muhammad.
comes. Ask your question, because I know there's so many issues that are going on. One brother is saying, you know, I want to get married, but my mom is saying no. One sister is saying, I want to marry that guy, but his mom says no. You know, what do we do? It's a tough situation. Sometimes it's a cultural gap, sometimes it's a racist problem. Yes, there's a racist problem in our society. What do we do? And thank God there's some experienced brothers and sisters here who can help answer your question. So let's throw it out. Muhammad, anybody has a question? Yes, Ali. Yes, what is your question? I'll ask you a question then. Anybody before we ask him a question? All right. So you're going to high school, and I know, I've seen your Facebook, the girls go after you. How do you survive this battle of the nafs? You have 4 temporary wives? Explain. What do you do? Islam is not a religion of suppression. So what makes you keep yourself on track?
Just like don't mind it. Worry about like schools.
Okay. So you can suppress your desires for a while, focusing on education, school, future. But some people are smart. This is, look, Sister Sakina, about you, because you're married very young, right?
Sure.
Like 18?
No, not that yet. I'm 23. We've been together for 2 years.
Okay, 21. All right, I got married at 22. You're close. So how did you make that right decision? How did you do it?
I think you look for the qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to look for in a spouse. So the taqwa that you're talking about,
Yes.
you want someone that has the same vision in life as you. So somebody that is practicing their Islam to the best of their abilities and has the aspiration to get better in that regards. But also it's important to have similar interests with that person, right? Because you're going to be living in this world with them. So like humanitarian stuff or political stuff or, sports and recreational activities and that kind of stuff. And then I think it's important to talk to them and, kind of make sure you guys are on the same page. And then for both of us, we went to our parents after we had we found that we were interested, and we kind of went to them for advice about where the next step would be to take that.
Alhamdulillah. Your parents are open-minded.
Alhamdulillah.
That's good. Excellent. That's why they've been married 26 years. Excellent. And what about anybody else? What could go wrong? Let's throw that example. I gave you a few stories. One sister got married to her brother, and after living with them for a while, they said, "Oh my God, I married a monster." How can you avoid that situation? What happens first is we're driven by our desires. Everything that's fantastic on the outside. And then you see the ego, the reality of the person. If you ever read this book, The New Earth, you begin to see who they really are once you get to live with. Actually, Ahlul-bayt will say, you want to know someone? Travel with them or do business with them, and you see their real self.
Isn't this what Mutahhari is for? The whole institution of Mutahhari is a kind of like a fail-safe.
Excellent.
You can't be with somebody unless you're legally bound to them. So
Yes.
you have a temporary legal
And that's the
bound.
beauty of Islam. Exactly. Excellent point. So he recommends something very important. Some of us, and it's a backward thinking. Islam doesn't forbid mutah. It's in the Quran, chapter 4, verse 24.
Mhm.
Okay, it's practiced during the time of the Prophet. It was banned later by the second Khalifa, which is not something that we agree with. It's a beautiful institution. That I'll use my example. Okay, I met my spouse by writing, and I told you I met her. The next day, I proposed, or we got engaged. That same day, I told her fathers we would have to do mutah. It doesn't have to be sexual. It's just that I get to know her, and she gets to know me more. And I think it was the greatest thing, because then you can even talk more intimately and don't have to worry about saying things that may be forbidden. Which actually Islam allows you to talk very openly, just within Islamic environment. So mutah helped us to get to know each other better. It's a beautiful institution. We see it today, and people they abuse it, and they do something wrong, and they go, that's like, I don't even know what they call it today. They call it prostitution or something stupid. It's not. It's marriage. It's the same as a marriage. Different rules, meaning there's about the support of the wife or the wife's obligations. It's all written out in the contract. And it's an expiration. You can roll it over. You can keep it for 99 years. There's a lot of rules within that. You should use it in the right way. Now someone says, yeah, I'm 14, I'm going to do mutah, right? Well, be careful. Because the emotional issues, remember, marriage, you will have love and attachment. And then you see the girl breaking up with you in 1 month and you're going crazy. Because they're used to flipping burgers, there's a flip boyfriends and girlfriends. And it's going to break your heart. And the emotional stress and depression that people go through, they don't think about that. They just worry about the libido and satisfying. What happens is some people get married and satisfying these desires and then they ignore the flaws. Well, this person may not work, living off his parents, doesn't go to university, but I love him. Okay, so then what happens when you get married? Nothing changes. It's doing the same thing, right? But if you see the person progressing, going the right way, struggling hard, it's okay. You may not be rich today, I don't need that. I want someone who's hardworking like me. That's beautiful. There's a match. As Sakina was explaining about her match. Anybody else has a good story or something to add? Sister Sadiqa, anything? Anything, throw it out. Because I know you're shy to ask, or Karar, or anybody. Say something. You have 10, 15 minutes before the pizza comes.
No, my question is, actually, people who are interested in getting married, so how do you know if that person is the right person? How
Okay.
can you test that?
I'll give you something that really works. Because no matter what the way you analyze someone, you will still not know. And that's why there's a big problem of divorce, right? People don't know. They begin to see, man, I've been dating that girl for 50 years and then I get married, divorce the next day. This is the stories you watch on TV in the Maury show. You get the chance to watch it. It's a terrible channel. Anyway, how do you know if it's the right match? For me, it was very easy. So I had these questions before I actually proposed, and I asked someone to do istikhara for me, and it came out fantastic. I said, well, she doesn't have this and that, but this will this be okay? Yeah, no problem, don't worry. I said, okay, Allah, I trust in you. Tawakkal Allah, you gave me my future. Then she also did istikhara, and it came out fantastic. I said, okay, no problem. One brother I know got divorced last year. They did istikhara, came out bad, but they got married anyway. What happened? They didn't trust in God because they followed their desires. And they said, oh, we're too far into it. We're going to get married next week. It's too late. It's never too late. But now the pain and suffering after that situation, it's terrible. I don't wish that to anybody. It's tough. It's tough. Thank God they don't have kids. It would be a disaster to their children. One of the worst things children go through is when you go through a tough divorce. Now, it's allowed in Islam. And the adopted son of the Prophet, Zayd, was married to the Prophet's cousin, Zainab, and eventually they got divorced. So yes, it's allowed. And there's no problem, especially if you maintain a good relationship and you have Allah as your focus. Today everybody fights, even after, and there's death threats, even after, and there's all these terrible phone calls and stuff they put on Facebook and YouTube. It's a tough world. And then you begin to see the reality of people. So istikhara is very important. If something comes out bad, just run. And no matter how beautiful the guy is, don't worry about it. Wait a few years.